All right, if you have your Bible, Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. So, I want you to imagine tonight as we get started a billionaire. Probably, you could, if you have in your mind, Elon Musk has a lot of stuff, right? But imagine a billionaire. He has everything. He has cars and mansions and yachts and private jets. He has literally everything that money can buy, right? Everything that money can buy. And to the outside world, they look at him and they say, "Man, that there's no way that guy has a need for anything." Right? Yeah, there's no way they have a want in the world. And imagine you have a conversation with that person, and that person says to you, I tried everything. In the world, I tried everything, and all of it left me empty. I traveled to every place on the planet that everybody wants to go. The wonders of the world, I've seen them. I've stood before them. I've been in them, and my heart is still unsatisfied. My soul, there's still a void in my soul. That's where King Solomon is in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and what we're going to look at tonight. He literally has access to limitless resources as the king of Israel. He has all the power that you can imagine. He's ordained by God to be king over Israel, right? And so he has access to every pleasure that you can imagine. Some things we're going to talk about tonight. And he does, even though he has some hiccups along the way, he does have a lot of success in his reign as king. Now, it's not always God-honoring success, but from the worldly, from the under the sun type of perspective, he has all the success in the world. And so if it were possible for wealth and achievement and entertainment to provide meaning, then Solomon would be the expert on that, right? He's seen it all. He's done it all. The guy built the temple, for goodness sakes. He's been there and done that, everything that you can imagine it. And Solomon, over and over again, has shown us in Ecclesiastes, whether it's wisdom or whatever, that it's all meaningless, right? It's all like chasing the wind when we look at it from this sort of earthly perspective and earthly plane. And so in the passage tonight, what Solomon is going to start to do is he's going to take it out of his head, right, out of wisdom and knowledge, and he's going to bring it to the practical level. He's going to literally start taking us on a personal journey through his experiments, and I'm going to call them experiments, his living his life on under the sun on this planet in all the pleasure and accomplishments and material wealth that you can imagine. And tonight we're going to look at laughter, and we're going to look at entertainment. We're going to look at wine. We're going to look at other indulgences. We're going to look at building projects and wealth beyond compare and every possible earthly blessing that you can imagine as we kind of look through the eyes of Solomon and try to understand meaning and purpose in this world. And of course, tonight is not going to be new. It's not going to be fresh. The same conclusion that Solomon has had the whole time is the conclusion he's going to have the whole time, right? That when we look at these things, when we look at stuff from this perspective, from this earthly plane, that there's vanity, futility, meaningless. It's like chasing the wind, right? We're running after it, but we can never catch it. And so we're going to look at all of those things. And as we're doing that tonight, I want you to be thinking about two questions. The first one is, what are we chasing? Right? What is Solomon chasing? What are we chasing? And the second thing I want you to ask yourself, are we expecting the world to give us what only God can? And I want us to think about those things honestly, because a lot of us, what we're really good at as Christians in the church is we're really good at giving Sunday school answers, right? Jesus, and then everyone claps because Jesus is the answer to everything. But tonight what I want us to do is I don't want us to approach this from a Sunday school answer perspective. I want us to look honestly and ask ourselves, what are we chasing? And in your life where you are right now, are you expecting the world to give you things that only God can give you? Right? And we'll talk as we work through this. You'll kind of see this unfold more and more through Solomon's journey. So let's read. We're going to read 11 verses, then we're going to work through them like we have. Beginning in verse 1, Solomon says, I said in my heart, come now, and I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. Behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made for myself gardens and parks, planted them in all kinds of fruit trees. I made for myself pools, from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves or servants, and had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and of flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and treasures of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great, surpassed all those who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all this toil. And then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So, he starts off in verse 1 and he says, in my heart. Now, if you think about what we've been talking about the wisdom of Solomon, and he had God-given wisdom, right? Beyond that of normal man, he had an extra dose of wisdom that God had given him to operate in his time as king. And so we've been talking about it from a head perspective. And when in the first chapter he mentions in his heart, he kind of uses it to do an introspective look at his own wisdom. So he's turning it inward to talk about his wisdom. And what he's talking about here, though, is he's talking about in his heart, he is coming from this perspective that he's going to look at all the pleasures of this life, and he's going to do it from a deliberate and intentional type of way. When he's saying here in his heart, he's saying, I'm putting my heart into evaluating the pleasure that I've experienced. So it's not just, hey, I'm looking at my life kind of flippantly, woohoo type of thing. He's saying, no, I'm putting my heart into this investigation into my experiences in this life, right? And what he's doing ultimately is he's saying and pointing us in a direction that we all go in. And what he's doing is he's looking at it from the perspective of self-directed pursuits, right? He's not talking about, and he's not going to talk about the things that God has told him to do. He's not going to talk even about building the temple. He's not going to talk about those sorts of things, but he's just going to talk about all the things he did that was born out of a self-desire, out of a self-directed type of mentality, right? From this perspective under the sun, right? Which is what he's talked about kind of over and over and over and over again. And he's doing he's looking at it in a way that I think can be valuable to all of us, because this is really, it would benefit the world a whole lot if they actually were to take a look at what they're pouring their life into from this perspective of Solomon. If they were to come from their heart and say, you know what, I'm going to look at all the self-directed pursuits that I'm involved in, the things that are not born out of God's desire for my life, but that are born out of my own sinful heart or my own mind. Instead of saying to the world, you need to look at things from that perspective, often what we do is we just say, well, the world is not going to do that because they're hopelessly lost. and that may be true, but it doesn't take us off the hook, right, for proclaiming the truth to the world. And the truth of the world to the world is that we all need to be introspective as we are living and moving and breathing in this world. Whether you're lost or saved, you should be looking inwardly. And Solomon, as he looks inwardly to try to find value in life and in his experience, he says, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself." Right? So he's just telling us right off the bat that what he's going to be looking at right here in these verses, it's going to revolve around the pleasures of life. It's going to involve everything and looking into everything that the world has to offer that people would find enjoyment in, like laughter and an amusement and food and wine and all those other types of indulgences that people have. And he uses a word here, test. And what test means is it means a conscious investigative effort. Right? So he says, "Come now." Remember, he's in his heart. He's saying, I'm gonna test. I'm gonna investigate with you, with the hearers, with those who he's teaching. I'm gonna investigate with you pleasure. We're gonna talk about the pleasures of this world. We're gonna talk about enjoying yourself and really what value does that have, because a lot of the world is under the perception of the enemy that if I could just experience more pleasure, then I'm going to be happy. Right? If I can just get that promotion, then I'm going to be happy. If I can just make more money, then I'm going to be happy. If I can just, do this or that, then that's going to bring happiness to my life. That's how we in this earthly realm, that's how we look for and explore the issue of joy and happiness and all of those things. If I can just take that dream vacation, if I can meet the right person and have that relationship, if I can just nail down some hobbies that occupy my time, if I can just find a source of entertainment that really takes my attention away from the moment, if I can just do that, then I'm going to have that fulfillment that I need, that my soul is longing for. It's going to fill that void in my life. But Solomon, as he has been doing, gives us kind of the news flash and the punch in the gut to say, hey, we're going to look at pleasure. We're going to see enjoyment. But behold, this is also vanity, right? So he says that word there again for vanity, habel. Habel, it means empty. It means futility. It means a vapor. And so what he says is even pleasure. It's like chasing the wind. You just can't grasp it. You can't hold on to it, right? What he says here from the beginning, so that no one is confused, is that no matter what type of pleasure you're talking about from this sort of earthly perspective, it doesn't matter what type of pleasure it is, it's temporary. It's going to be temporary. It's going to fade just as quickly as it invades and envelops your mind, and it's going to leave your heart empty. You know this. All you have to do is look at kids, right? How easily do kids watch a TV show and it makes them happy, and then it's over, and they're not happy anymore, right? They need the next thing. But how many adults do the same thing with other things, right? For some people, if we're being honest, it's relationships, right? You get in a relationship with somebody, and it's like good, and then it's not good, so you just dump them and you move on to the next, and you're trying to find that which is going to fill that void in your life. And so you're a serial dater or a serial relationship person. We're just on to the next to try to find that joy. Or what do? You get a job, and it's a good job, and then you realize that it's not fun. Newsflash, there's not a job that's fun, right? Nobody's out there working because it's fun, all right? Even when I was thumping people on the forehead as a police officer, it wasn't fun. There were moments that were fun. When I arrested bad guys, that part was fun, but 99.9% of the time, not fun, right? So if we're trying to find satisfaction and fulfillment in what we do, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to be a serial employee too, right? You're going to have a new job every 15 minutes because you're going to get a job and you're going to hate it and you're going to go on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, right? And it's just not going to work and it's going to be a complete and utter mess. And so what Solomon is doing is saying, listen, when you're chasing pleasure, there's no way under any circumstance when you look at it from an earthly perspective that you are going to find lasting purpose. It is just not going to happen, right? Your soul is always going to be left wanting something, right? It's like when you eat a big meal, right? And your belly's full, but then there's ice cream in the fridge, in the freezer, right? You don't need it. But what happens? You desire it. You think, man, my belly's full, but that ice cream would taste real good. And you eat ice cream even though you don't need it. And what happens? Well, you sit down, you watch TV for a little bit, and then you have some peanuts because you need to snack on something else, right? That's the way this is playing out, right, in life. And it just plays out across the board, the same in every area when it comes to the pleasures of this world. And so what Solomon does is he goes on to talk about practically how this worked out in his own life. And he goes first to amusement, right, to entertainment. He goes first to the lighthearted part of it. He said, maybe laughter, right? We think, man, if I can just watch a good comedy or see a good comedian, laughter's good for the soul, right? That's not true. Like, it does make you feel better, but it's temporary, right? It's not good for your soul. It's good for the moment, but it's not good for your soul, especially when it's looked at from this perspective. He says, I said of laughter, it's mad. It's mad. Mad literally means foolish. So he says, I know that there's nothing new under the sun, and in 2024, just like when he's writing this, he knows that humanity's primary escape from the pressures of this life are for people to look at laughter to lift their spirits, right? When you're having a bad day, you watch TikTok or Facebook reels and you see that like really funny thing that happens and it just cracks you up, man. And you laugh and suddenly the pressures of the day go away and then, you start thinking about life again and they come right back. But Solomon says if you're looking for fulfillment, if you think laughter is going to be the thing that resolves the emptiness inside of you, it's not. Ask Robin Williams. One of the funniest people to ever exist on this planet. Yet, the void in his heart, in his life, was never filled. A story of so many people, right? So many comedians, even presently, that struggle with depression, right? And are dealing with anxiety and those sorts of things. Why? Because it's madness, it's foolishness to think that laughter is going to be the thing that heals the void in our heart. Laughter distracts, it doesn't heal. You can use laughter to cover up pain. You can use laughter to avoid deep emotional and spiritual questions, but laughter, as enjoyable as it may be, cannot bring lasting meaning. It can. But how often do we turn to entertainment or humor to escape reality? Laughter is temporary. It cannot sustain us in those deep moments of sorrow, and it cannot answer the big questions in our life. It just can't. And he says of pleasure, what use is it? He dismisses pleasure altogether. Not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't provide ultimate purpose. Pleasure, like laughter, is a temporary thing. It's temporary enjoyment, but it always leaves us looking for more, wanting more. Well, how do you know? Well, because binge watching TV shows is a thing, right? We want to know what happens. Listen, if you don't believe this is true, look at how many people watch The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. That show is absurd to me. But people love that junk. They even got the Golden Bachelor now. It's old people. So if you're old and you got a lot of money, you're having trouble locking somebody down, you can go on that TV show and It's just like the normal Bachelor, except it's old people making out on TV, right? So, absurd, right? That was not in my notes. That was for free. So, and it got weird real fast, but I said it and I can't take it back. So, uh, pleasure, in excess, most of the time just leaves us at a place ultimately of emptiness and frustration. It may bring joy, but that joy is so short-lived, right? That's why alcoholics are alcoholics, right? Because they think if they can drink this bottle, it's going to make them feel better. The problem is they drink that bottle, they feel better, and then the buzz wears off and they don't feel better anymore. Same thing with people who use drugs, right? It's going to take the edge off of the moment. The problem is that wears off, and you need more to take the edge off the moment again. Why? Because pleasure, what use is it? What use is it? When you pursue pleasure for the sake of pleasure, it's useless, Solomon says. Self-centered pleasure leaves us dissatisfied from Solomon's perspective, from the Bible's perspective. It may feel good for a minute, but there's nothing lasting about it. And now he goes on from this sort of general statement to go into some more detail about things like wine and folly. And he's not talking about using alcohol recklessly. He's just talking about using alcohol altogether. I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. He says, I drank wine for enjoyment and pleasure. My goal in this was to cheer his body, right? To bring comfort and relaxation through his indulgence in wine. And whether you like it or not, historically, wine has symbolized pleasure and sort of festivity. And so Solomon is looking at it more as an escape. The reason most people use alcohol anyway, right? I mean, the majority of people who use alcohol on the regular are using it as some form of escape. Now, it may not be that you have these huge issues in your life that you're trying to escape. It may just be that you're trying to find that temporary satisfaction, right? That temporary relief of care. It may just be something as simple as that, but he wants you to know that if this kind of pleasure could give life meaning, he would have it, and it didn't. Right? Solomon experiments with wine the same way everybody, like I just said, the majority of people in modern days run after wine. That if I can experience pleasure through substances, through these indulgences, then I can find relief from life. Right? I can find temporary cheer, and then I need more and more and more and more, because temporary cheer is temporary, right? There's no lasting peace. There's no lasting purpose. And Solomon says here, when he was doing that, when he was experimenting with trying to cheer his body with wine, he says, my heart still guided me with wisdom. He said, it wasn't like I was out there being crazy, right? Solomon wasn't at a bar. I can't think of the name of a famous bar right now, but he wasn't there, right? He wasn't acting a fool. He wasn't getting hammered on the weekends and all that, trying to find out really if this was going to bring him peace. No, he says, I was still using the wisdom that God gave me. I was still operating from that perspective. I was just doing it, and I was engaging in self-indulging pleasure, but I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't foolish about the way I was handling this. He was self-aware, right? As he's seeking pleasure through wine. And his search, again, this is a test, right? It's intentional, it's calculated. He's trying to understand whether the pleasure of wine was going was going to bring him that genuine satisfaction that he was looking for. Right? That's his goal here. He used his wisdom not to get out of control, but to, in a calculated way, indulge. And he says the result is the same as you would expect, that it was a meaningless pursuit. So even intelligence and self-control can't give you meaning in life. And he says, and how to lay hold of folly. So folly is the reckless, foolish side of things. So he says, I tried wine, and that didn't work. And so I tried the really crazy, living my best life now, right? And just sort of foolish living. I tried that. I did what normal wise people wouldn't do to try to find satisfaction and pleasure. And he says, well, that didn't really work out either. In fact, he says, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days we have on this earth. So he says, I looked at the brevity of life and all the things, the crazy things that I could do in this short life that God had given me. I'm looking at that the children of man were doing, right? That's not a nice way of talking about humanity, all right? Children of God is the nice way of talking about humanity. When you're talking about those who are believers, the children of man are children of Adam, right? He's taking a shot and saying, listen, those who are out here living in the world, the things that they're doing under heaven in the few days in their life, it's not working either. So all the crazy things that you think, jumping out of a perfectly good airplane, if you think that's going to fulfill the longing of your soul, it's not, right? If you think chasing that next adrenaline rush, that's what's going to fulfill your heart, it's not. It will for a minute. That would not be fun for me, but some of you weirdos, that would be fun for you, right? I'm not bungee jumping either. That's crazy. But people who are chasing after fulfillment in those things, they do that ridiculous stuff, right? They jump out of good planes, right? They go swimming in the oceans with chum in the water, surrounded by great white sharks. That's dumb, right? But they're chasing that. Man, it just gives you that rush, that momentary feeling that your life has meaning and purpose, that you have fulfillment. And so they just keep doing this crazy stuff, that folly that Solomon is talking about. And he says, man, if you think that's going to give you ultimate fulfillment, it's not. You're going to have joy, but it's always going to go away. What's going to happen is you're going to live your life crazy like that, and then at the end of your life, when you're on your deathbed, you're going to realize how brief life actually is, and you're going to realize that you chased the high every moment of your life, and you have nothing to show for it. Right? Your legacy, you can chase the dollar, and you can have a lot of money in the bank, and you can leave your kids a lot of money, but money is not a legacy. It has no meaning. It has no meaning whatsoever. Imagine that you work your entire life and you have a fat bank account and you waste your life at the office. And on your deathbed, you tell your kids, you are going to be the richest children on this planet. And they say to you, yeah, but we never got a chance to spend time with you. We don't know you. Right? That's the story of some people's lives, man. They chase the dollar. They chase the high. They chase the adrenaline rush. They chase all of those things. And what they come to realize at the end of the day is all those things brought fun, but that fun always went away. It brought them a sense of purpose and meaning, but that sense of purpose and meaning always went away. It was never lasting purpose and meaning. And he goes on to say, I made great works. Dude built houses, mansions. He planted vineyards for himself. He made gardens and parks. He planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. He made pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. He did these grandiose things. He built towers and mansions and incredibly beautiful gardens. And natural, basically wonders of the world, he built. And his legacy, his worldly legacy, tells us that those things were true. He did all of those things. He oversaw the construction of all these things, including the temple. But despite all of that, despite all of these magnificent things that were produced through Solomon, they were all self-focused. They were all for himself. And they were awesome, but it was all built out of a self-centered ambition. Building projects and wealth may be impressive, but they don't satisfy the soul. They don't. It'd be cool if I walked in New York, downtown New York, and there was a building that said Eric Egger Tower. That would be cool. But it doesn't satisfy my soul. I don't care. And that's the way most people are, man. That's cool, but it doesn't satisfy. He says, I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. Solomon accumulated great wealth. He owned servants and slaves, which, if you don't know, it's a status symbol. He was wealthy. He had power, right? This is equivalent. This happens today. We just don't call it this because because it's not politically correct. But listen, how many you think Elon Musk cleans his own toilets? You think he cuts his own grass? He probably has a robot to do it, but like when do you think the last time that Trump cleaned a toilet at a hotel? Right? Never, right? Joe Biden certainly isn't doing anything at the White House, and I mean that literally and every other way. But I mean, he's not cleaning toilets, right? He's not doing all. He's not upkeeping the grounds. And so, what Solomon does here is he says, I literally lived my life as a life of luxury. I relaxed. I never had to do anything that I wasn't doing for my own enjoyment. Like, I never had to do something. I was like, oh man, no, I had people to do it. Right? He didn't, if he wanted to, he could have just laid back and he could have had people feed him. He wouldn't even had to move. Right? It wasn't like, listen, Solomon didn't have a honey-do list. We'll talk about this in a minute. It would be impossible with 700 wives and 300 concubines, but that I wouldn't want to see that honey-do list. But he didn't have a honey-do list. People did all the daily stuff. There were people that did that for him. He literally could live his life for complete enjoyment and relaxation. He says he even had slaves born in his household. That's generational type of wealth. It's not just that he's wealthy. He is stinking rich, man. He's got it all. And he's surrounded by people that literally serve his every single need. And it's the same thing that's happening around the world in the lives of a lot of rich people around the world. Right? You have rich people that don't even drive themselves places. Right? They want to go to the store. If they want to go to the store, they have, hey, bring the car around. Right? That's the type of, now Solomon bring the camel around, I guess, or whatever, but horses would be the fastest way. But I mean, that's the life he lived. Complete ease, comfort, and luxury. And he says, it didn't satisfy my soul. The deepest need, the meaning and the joy in the relationship, these external comforts just didn't do it. He says, I had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. The word great, when you talk about herds and flocks, that's traditionally a sign of, in ancient Israel, wealth, a lot of wealth, right? Great wealth. And so his flocks were greater than anyone who was before him. So his wealth, he says, my wealth was unparalleled. I didn't have any worries in the world. There was never a bill I had to worry about paying. None of that. There was never anything that I could not buy. No, not even one thing. And he says that someone who owns so much, and yet the search for meaning was still outside of my reach. It was still outside of his reach. In Proverbs 27, in verse 20, it says that Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied. They're never satisfied, and never satisfied are the eyes of man. Now, what is Sheol and Abaddon? It's, in the Old Testament, Sheol would be equivalent to a New Testament understanding of eternity without Christ. Right? I don't want to say hell, because hell is not, I guess it could be hell. You could say it that way. It's the equivalent of hell. And Abaddon, it literally means destruction. It's the traditionally understood as like the same as the bottomless pit type of language that we see in the New Testament, right? So it's this sort of place of, it's not a nice place and it's not a good place. It's a place of suffering and all of those things. And it says here in Proverbs 27 that they're never satisfied, and the eyes of man are never satisfied. So wealth is cool, but wealth increases the appetite for more, right? There's not a rich person on the planet that's satisfied, right? Mark Cuban has all that money, and he still does Shark Tank to try to make more money, right? He's always trying to make more money. Listen, if he never made another dollar in his life, he couldn't even spend what he has. Just like Trump and all those other, they could not spend the money they have in their lifetime. In fact, in all the generations of their kids and grandkids, they couldn't spend that money in their lifetime. They always want more, right? There's always a thirst. There's always a desire for more and more and more. And Solomon sees that in his own life. He says, I gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasures of kings and provinces. He amassed massive amounts of gold and silver and the treasures of nations, right? As he took the spoils of war and took tributes from foreign rulers in 1 Kings chapter 10. And so he's amassing this huge wealth. His goal here was to gather as much wealth as possible, and hoping that if the storehouses were full of gold and silver, that was going to be one of the things that brought him joy and fulfillment, right? The same thing that we think. If my bank account has enough zeros on the end of it, not only zeros, but one followed by a lot of zeros, then a dot and a lot and two zeros, right? If we think, if that's just if my bank account can say that, man, I'm going to have happiness. I'm going to have the financial security I need that's going to lead me to happiness. And Solomon shows us that you can have the greatest financial wealth ever to exist, and you cannot have meaning and purpose in your life. In Luke chapter 12 and verse 15, Jesus says, one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Wealth is useful, but it doesn't satisfy the soul. He said, I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. Again, sons of man, not necessarily a good thing. Solomon surrounded himself with entertainment, right? With both entertainment to the ears and other forms of entertainment, as in sexual entertainment, right? He had male and female singers who were constantly providing music and entertainment, and he had these many concubines that were fulfilling his sexual desires. And it's kind of the same way that, again, in Nothing New Under the Sun, that people try to find fulfillment now, right? We think that music, if that will satisfy the longing of our soul. And music is good, and it's enjoyable, but it doesn't satisfy the longing of our soul. And same thing with sex, right? People think that if I can just have that feeling of connection and intimacy, that's going to satisfy the longing of my soul. But what happens? End up empty, right? You have these women out here, men out here, who have these huge body counts, as the kids say these days. They have these huge body counts, and they'll talk about it as if it's something to be proud of, but you can see in their eyes, they're not proud of it. You can see the emptiness in their soul when you look into their eyes. I've seen all these interviews on all these podcasts with these ladies who are doing OnlyFans, right, and all that junk. right? And they're talking about it like they're proud of it because they're making hundreds of $1,000s a month, but in their eyes are empty because their heart is empty. Because they have all the money in the world and all the attention in the world, but it does not satisfy the longing of their soul. It just doesn't. Solomon didn't think entertainment was enough, and so he surrounded himself with concubine. Now, listen, this is one of the things non-Christians like to bring up about the Old Testament, like polygamy and all these having a lot of wives. Listen, that wasn't a blessing from God. That nowhere in the Old Testament does God look at that and say, "Woohoo!" Right? In fact, ask Solomon, because it didn't satisfy his sexual desire, but it didn't satisfy any other desire either. Right? 700 wives he had in 1 Kings 11, 300 concubines. So sexual gratification on that level, and I would argue on any level, when you pursue it without God, is empty and unfulfilling. Right? There is, in the moment, right, there is physical gratification, but it does not fill the void in your life. And in fact, it creates more of a void in your life. 700 wives, bro. Dude, it was crazy. All right? Wow. Clearly, he says this was not good, right? So it wasn't a blessing from God. So he pursued greatness and pleasure and wealth without any limitations. But he does so with wisdom and with resources. And what he says over and over again is that the vanity was never done away with. That futility, that emptiness, it just was nothing ever satisfied the longing of his soul. He said, so I became great and surpassed all those who were before me in Jerusalem. He says, in case you're not getting it, right? I had it all. There was no one ever to be in the position that I was in. I had unmatched power, unmatched wealth. I had everything that anyone could ever imagine, and I was the most renowned figure in Jerusalem's history, and I was great and powerful. I had cultural and political and material success. I built palaces. I amassed wealth. I had the privilege of royalty. I had earthly success and recognition, and none of it satisfied the longing and the deepest question that I had, and that is, what is the meaning of this life? He said none of that answered that question, right? We have the same obsession, right? People are pursuing all of these different things to try to figure out, what is my purpose for being here? Why am I on this earth? That question cannot be answered apart from God. It can't be answered apart from the Creator. Because any answer that you give is from this plane of existence right here, and this plane of existence does not have the answer to satisfy the soul. It has the answer to make you feel good for a minute. It has the answer to make you forget the pressures of this life for a minute. It has the chance to make you not have to worry about your bills getting paid for a minute, but it does not satisfy the soul. Also, my wisdom remained with me. He says, listen, when I was doing this, God didn't take the wisdom from me. It wasn't like I was pursuing these things and doing these things, and God removed that incredible godly wisdom He gave me. He says, no, I had all that. He said, I had all that. But the problem was, I was looking at things here. He said, I had the wisdom that God had given me, incredible wisdom, but I never applied it. I always applied it to the earthly plane, to under the sun. I applied it to where I was right in the moment, and I had everything, and I did everything, and at the end of the day, when I laid my head on the pillow every night, I still asked myself, what is my purpose here? What is the meaning of me existing on this planet? Why am I here? What am I doing? What am I doing? You see, there's no amount of wisdom alone that can solve the questions of your life. There's no amount of knowledge or insight that can replace the true need of man's heart. And he says, whatever my eyes desired, I didn't keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. He said, anything that I saw that I wanted, I had. Anything and everything I wanted. If it was a nation, I took it. If it was a servant, I took them. If it was wine or food, I took it. I had all of that stuff. I lived a life of unrestrained self-gratification. He said, if I can just get everything I want, then that's going to be what makes me happy. But his reward was momentary enjoyment, and that's it. This was the reward for my toil. All the pleasure, all the work was momentary gratification, a fleeting feeling. That was it. He says, then I consider all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity, striving after the wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. He says, I looked at all of it, and it just never answered the question. It never filled the void in my life. And every time I had everything I wanted and I felt like I had a grasp on life, it was like chasing the wind. It just was there and gone. Satisfaction, the satisfied feeling was there and gone. Over and over and over again. Nothing under the sun, none of the earthly pursuits, when they're disconnected from God, bring meaning to your life, bring purpose to your life, bring fulfillment to your life. Those earthly pleasures may bring you temporary enjoyment, but they cannot fill the void in your life. There's no amount of alcohol that's going to fill the void in your life. There's no amount of pills that are going to fill the void in your life. You're not going to smoke enough weed in your life to fill the void of your heart. You're not going to sleep with enough people to fill the void in your heart. Over and over and over again, Solomon is showing us the truth that we as human beings are created for something greater. It's not here. It's fellowship with God. It's up here. I mean, imagine carrying a bucket with a hole in the bottom, and no matter how many times you fill that stinking bucket up with water, it just keeps leaking out, right? And you keep filling it up over and over and over again. It just keeps trickling out the bottom, and it's empty over and over and over again. No matter how many times you refill it, you hope it's going to stay full the next time, but it just leaks out of the bottom again. Solomon says pleasure and wealth and achievements are like water in the bucket. You can pour all of that stuff into the bucket of your life, but unless that void, unless that hole is filled in your life, it's just going to trickle out, and you're going to need more and more and more and more. It's going to feel good when you initially fill that bucket up, right? Because it's full, right? There's that fulfillment, but it just goes away. There's nothing lasting. The more we try to fill our lives with these sorts of things, the more we are going to feel empty, because it's always going to run out. Right? You're going to get to the bottom of the bottle. Right? You're going to run out of pills. Right? Eventually, you're going to sleep with so many folks, ain't nobody going to want to sleep with you. You're going to run out of people, right? I mean, it's always going to run out. It's always going to, in the end, leave you empty. It's going to make you feel good for a minute. But Solomon is saying to us that you can have all these things and you can have fulfillment in this life, but you cannot have it apart from God. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. There is no one in this world right now or ever that has had a fulfilled life apart from a saving relationship with the Lord Jesus? Never. And there's never going to be. There's never going to be. The only way that we're going to find ultimate satisfaction is when we find a relationship with God through the Lord Jesus. That's when what we accomplish, what we achieve, and what we enjoy become not under the sun anymore. That's when our attention goes from here to there. We understand, and instead of understanding everything in light of what it provides right here in this moment, we understand it from an eternal perspective, from a perspective of a relationship with a holy and good God. Solomon is, and this is not over. We're going to see this over and over again until we get to the end of this, but his contention for us is that you can try, you can run after it all, but there's a hole in the bucket. And you can fill it with anything. There's still going to be a hole in the bucket unless your life is radically transformed by God. You see, the thing about it is, what we often do when we talk about the Old Testament and those who believe in the Old Testament is we think that somehow that we have something they don't, right? That we somehow have discovered the key to all this. But the truth of the matter is, Solomon, at the end of his life, what he realizes is that the only way that he was going to have hope is in the Messiah. And so Solomon is saved in anticipation of the coming of the Messiah. Just like David and all the believers in the Old Testament were saved. They believed that a Messiah was coming. They didn't know his name was Jesus, but they believed in the promise that God made in Genesis chapter 3 and the promise that God made on Mount Moriah with Abraham and the promise God made the whole time that he was going to provide the once and for all sacrifice for sin, the promise that he made in Isaiah 55. They believed all of that, and it's out of that belief in the coming Messiah that they were saved. And Solomon, at the end of his life, says, I have lived a life on this earth that anyone and everyone wants to live, and the only way that filled that hole in the bucket is when I gave my life to God, and I realized that the only grace and salvation that was going to see me through and that was going to give real meaning to all this stuff was a relationship with God Almighty, with Yahweh, through the promise of the Messiah to come. We just get the opportunity to look back and call his name Jesus. They looked ahead to call him Messiah. But he's the only way that that void is ever really filled. And Solomon's on to it, but he's just showing you the hell that he went through to get there in his own life so that we don't have to go through that now. It's wisdom. It's incredibly godly wisdom manifest in his testimony, which is what we're seeing over and over again. Any questions tonight?